Mara Ellison arrived at the Voss penthouse at exactly 1:03 a.m. She noted the time automatically. She always did. Time mattered in cases like this, not because it told you when something happened, but because it told you how carefully someone planned it. The private elevator opened directly into the residence. No hallway, no reception space, just money. Immediate and overwhelming. Glass walls revealed the sleeping city below. Muted lights reflected on polished stone floors. The kind of quiet you only find in places where noise has been designed out of existence. A uniformed officer stood near the entrance, rigid and unsure. He nodded when he saw Mara, relief flickering across his face. "No forced entry," he said, too quickly. "Locks are intact. Windows sealed. Security says—" Mara raised a hand. "Security says what it's paid to say," she replied calmly. She stepped inside. The penthouse smelled wrong. Not decay, not blood. Something cleaner, sterile, like a hospital room after visiting hours. The dining area came into view first. That's where Daniel Voss was waiting. He sat upright at the head of a long glass table, his back straight, shoulders relaxed, as if he had simply paused mid-thought. A crystal glass of water sat inches from his right hand. No fingerprints visible on the rim, no condensation on the table. Untouched. His eyes were open. Mara stopped walking. Seasoned detectives don't react to bodies. They catalog them. But something about Voss forced her to slow down. His expression wasn't fear. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't pain. It was acceptance. Like a man who had reached the final line of a contract and signed it willingly. The medical examiner cleared his throat. "Female, mid-40s, he began automatically. Mara didn't correct him. She was watching Voss's left hand. The fingers were relaxed, not clenched. No defensive posture. No struggle. No visible trauma, the examiner continued. No ligature marks, no punctures, no bruising. "Toxicology?" Mara asked. "Pending," he replied. "But preliminary scan is clean." Mara nodded slowly. Clean deaths were never clean. She circled the table. Every chair was perfectly aligned, placements untouched, not a single object out of place. A home designed to impress, not to live in. "Time of death?" she asked. The examiner hesitated. "That's the problem," he admitted. "There's no clear window. Body temperature doesn't align with rigor. It's inconsistent." Inconsistent. Mara moved toward the wall-mounted security console. A screen glowed faintly, looping camera feeds from earlier in the evening. She tapped the timestamp controls. 1:58 p.m., Voss enters alone. 1:03 a.m., he pours water. 1:10 a.m., he sits. 1:17 a.m., black. Every screen cut to nothing at the exact same moment. No static, no flicker, just absence. 1:19 a.m., feeds restored. Daniel Voss was still seated, but something had changed. Mara leaned closer to the screen. Between 1:10 and 1:19, Daniel Voss did not move once. No reaching, no turning, no reaction. "Do you see that?" she asked quietly. The officer leaned in. "He didn't fall," Mara said. "He didn't collapse. He didn't fight." She straightened. "He died sitting upright." The officer swallowed. "Maybe a heart attack?" Mara shook her head. "Heart attacks don't schedule power outages." She turned back to the body. Daniel Voss was a familiar name, not to the public, not really, but to courts, to sealed settlements, to cases that disappeared before trial, witnesses who changed their stories, whistleblowers who relocated suddenly, accidents that closed investigations permanently. Daniel Voss didn't threaten people. He compensated them, which meant someone else had learned from him. Mara crouched near the table, studying the glass again. No prints, no residue, no poison detected. "Tell me," she said to no one in particular, "how a man dies in a locked room under constant surveillance, without a weapon, without a toxin, without fear." No one answered, because the answer was already there. This wasn't a murder scene. It was a demonstration. Someone had entered without entering, acted without being seen, killed without violence, and left behind no evidence, only certainty. Mara stood. "He didn't die here," she said softly. A few heads turned. "But his body is here," the officer said. "Yes," Mara replied, "because it needed to be found." She looked once more at Daniel Voss's calm, open eyes. "Whoever did this," she continued, "wanted us to know that money can still reach you, even when you lock the doors." She stepped away from the body. "Seal the building," she ordered. "Freeze financial records. Pull every employee who worked tonight." "And, detective," the officer asked carefully. Mara paused. "What are we looking for?" Mara didn't hesitate. Not who killed him, she said. Who approved it? Mara Ellison didn't return to headquarters after leaving the penthouse. Instead, she sat in her car for 12 minutes, engine off, city lights bleeding softly through the windshield. She replayed the footage again in her mind. 12:10. Daniel Voss sits. 12:17. Blackout. 12:19. Restored. No movement. No struggle. No interruption. You don't erase 7 minutes unless those 7 minutes matter more than everything else. That's when she pulled the personnel roster. Night shift, security supervisors, maintenance overrides, emergency protocols. One name stood out immediately. Evan Cole. Night security supervisor, former Army logistics, clean evaluations, transferred to this building 6 months ago. Unusually fast for a private contract. Mara frowned. People like Evan didn't move up quickly unless someone wanted them exactly where they were. She drove to his apartment just before dawn. A low-rise complex. Too modest for a man who worked in one of the most expensive buildings in the city. Too clean. Evan opened the door on the second knock. He was fully dressed. Boots on, jacket zipped, keys already in hand. That told Mara everything she needed to know. "You're expecting someone," she said calmly. "Habit. Military." Mara nodded, as if she believed him, and stepped inside without waiting for permission. The apartment smelled like disinfectant. Not recently cleaned, recently erased. No photos, no mail, no personal clutter. Even the trash can was empty. "You gave a statement," Mara said, walking slowly through the living room. "Short one." "I didn't see anything unusual," Evan recited quickly. "Systems malfunctioned. Cameras rebooted. Mr. Voss was alone when I last checked." Mara stopped near the window. "What time did you last check?" she asked. Evan hesitated, just a fraction too long. 12:10. Mara turned. "And what time did your access badge record you exiting the security office?" Evan swallowed. 12:22. "That's not what the logs say," Mara replied gently. "They say 12:14. Evan's jaw tightened. "System error." Mara nodded again. "You've used that phrase twice now." She placed her recorder on the table, but didn't turn it on. That was deliberate. People spoke more freely when they thought nothing was being saved. "Let's walk through your night, slowly." Evan rubbed his hands together. "I did my rounds, checked feeds, everything normal." At 12:17, Mara said, every camera in the building shut down simultaneously. Evan didn't answer. At 12:19, they came back online. No alerts, no errors logged. Still nothing. Mara leaned forward. "Security systems don't fail like that. They're designed not to." Evan's hands began to shake. "I want a lawyer," he said. "That's fine," Mara replied, "but lawyers can't help you remember." That landed. Evan looked up sharply. "Remember what?" Mara studied his face carefully. "You're missing time," she said. "Not just in the logs, in your head." Evan laughed nervously. "That's ridiculous." "Is it? Because when I asked what happened during the blackout, you said you didn't see anything." She paused. "But you also said you were in the security office the entire time." Evan froze. "You can't see nothing if you weren't there." Silence filled the room. Heavy. Pressurized. "They told me it was routine," Evan whispered suddenly. Mara didn't interrupt. "They showed badges, federal-looking, said there was a gas leak risk, ordered me to step away." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Names?" she asked. Evan shook his head. "They didn't give any, just authority." "What route did they take you out?" "Service stairwell. No cameras." "How long were you gone?" Evan closed his eyes. "I don't know." Mara let that breathe. When you came back, she said quietly, what did you see? Nothing, Evan replied. They told me I wouldn't remember, said it was better that way. Better for who? Mara asked. Evan's voice cracked. They said Mr. Voss had enemies, dangerous ones, that if he disappeared quietly, people would be safer. Disappeared. Again. Mara stood. You didn't witness a murder. You witnessed a removal. Evan looked up, panic flooding his face. They promised I wouldn't be charged. They said everything would be taken care of. That promise was not legal. It was financial. Evan shook his head. I didn't take money. No, Mara agreed. You took immunity. She turned toward the door. Your statement is going to change, and when it does, people will panic. Evan's voice dropped to a whisper. I already changed it once. Mara paused. That was the moment everything shifted. Because witnesses don't change statements once. They change them when someone corrects the truth for them. As Mara stepped into the hallway, her phone vibrated. Unknown number. Stop digging. The case is closed. She deleted the message without replying, because now she understood something crucial. Daniel Voss didn't just buy silence. He taught others how to sell it. And Evan Cole wasn't a witness. He was proof that the crime scene didn't start in the penthouse. It started long before midnight. By the time Mara Ellison reached headquarters, the case file had already changed. Not expanded, not corrected, reduced. Pages were missing. Digital entries were marked administratively resolved. Internal notes she had dictated an hour earlier were gone, not deleted but replaced with neutral summaries. No errors, no alerts, just absence. Mara stood at her desk, scrolling slowly, jaw tight. This was new. Cases didn't start disappearing this early, unless someone powerful was afraid of where they might lead. She checked the legal attachments next. That's when she noticed it. Daniel Voss had a personal attorney assigned to him, not corporate, not retained by a firm. One name, repeated across multiple sealed settlements over the past decade. Lucas Hale. Mara leaned back. She knew the name. Everyone in major crimes did. Lucas Hale was the kind of lawyer who didn't lose cases because his cases never reached court. He specialized in pre-litigation resolutions, confidential agreements, private arbitrations, non-disclosure stacked on non-disclosure. When Hale was involved, records went quiet. Mara pulled every file tied to his name. Fraud investigations that ended suddenly, civil suits withdrawn days before hearings, criminal referrals downgraded without explanation, and always the same note at the bottom of the file, resolved privately. She drove to Hale's office just after 10 a.m. It wasn't downtown, it wasn't flashy. A converted townhouse on a quiet street where money didn't need to announce itself. The receptionist didn't look surprised when Mara showed her badge. He's expecting you, the woman said, already standing. That worried Mara more than resistance would have. Lucas Hale rose from behind his desk as she entered. Mid-50s, tailored suit, calm eyes. The posture of a man who had never been rushed by consequences. Detective Ellison, he said warmly. My condolences. Daniel was complicated. Mara didn't sit. You filed nothing, she said. Hale smiled faintly. There was nothing to file. Your client died under suspicious circumstances, Mara replied, in a locked penthouse during a coordinated security blackout. And yet, Hale said gently, no evidence of foul play has been established. Mara stepped closer. Autopsy isn't complete. True, Hale agreed. But the absence of evidence is also evidence, detective, especially when it's consistent. That was a lawyer's trick. Mara circled the room slowly. On the walls hung framed documents. Not verdicts, not awards. Contracts, settlements. Each one represented a problem that never became public. You've represented Mr. Voss for 11 years, Mara said. In that time, he's been connected to at least 9 major investigations. Hale folded his hands. And charged with none. Witnesses recanted, Mara continued. Records vanished, people relocated. Hale nodded. People make choices when given options. Mara stopped in front of his desk. What option did Daniel Voss choose last night? Hale didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower. Daniel was afraid, he said. That was new. Of what? Mara asked. Of becoming irrelevant, Hale replied. Men like him don't fear death first, they fear exposure. Mara narrowed her eyes. You met with him yesterday. Hale didn't deny it. He believed someone was preparing to sacrifice him, Hale continued. Not legally, publicly. Mara felt the first real chill. Who? She asked. Hale stood and walked to the window. That, he said, isn't something I can disclose. Mara placed her hands on the desk. You filed no missing person report, she said. No protective request, no emergency injunction. Hale turned back. Because Daniel didn't want protection, he said. He wanted certainty. The word hung between them. Certainty. Mara understood then. Daniel Voss hadn't been killed unexpectedly. He had been negotiated with. You helped him disappear, Mara said. Hale met her gaze. I helped him ensure there would be no chaos, he replied. No investigation spiral, no spectacle. Mara's voice hardened. He's dead. Hale nodded once. Then the agreement was altered. Mara stepped back. Agreements. Transactions. Just like she thought at the scene. She turned toward the door. One more thing, she said, without looking back. You didn't file anything because you were told not to. Hale didn't argue. Who told you? Mara asked. Silence. That was answer enough. As she left the office, her phone rang. Not a message this time. A call. Unknown number. She answered. A man's voice spoke calmly on the other end. This case will damage your career, he said. Walk away. Mara stopped on the sidewalk. Who is this? She asked. The voice chuckled softly. Someone with fewer limits than you. The call ended. Mara stared at her phone. Lucas Hale hadn't protected Daniel Voss. He had managed the fallout. Which meant the death wasn't the end of the transaction. It was the execution of it. And somewhere above lawyers, witnesses, and police procedure, someone was still finalizing the paperwork. The autopsy report arrived without ceremony. No red flags, no urgent calls, no warnings. It appeared in Mara Ellison's inbox just after 6:42 a.m., tagged as preliminary findings, final likely. That alone made her pause. Preliminary reports weren't supposed to sound finished. She closed her office door and sat down slowly. The room felt smaller than usual. Too quiet. She opened the file. Cause of death? Natural. Cardiac event. Contributing factors? Stress. No evidence of trauma. No toxins detected. Mara stared at the screen. Then she read it again. And again. The language was careful. Overly careful. Every sentence seemed designed not to say the wrong thing rather than to say the right one. She scrolled. Time of death? Between 12:10 a.m. and 12:30 a.m. A 20-minute window. Convenient. Wide enough to swallow 7 missing minutes without choking. Mara leaned back and closed her eyes. She had stood over Daniel Voss's body. She had seen his posture, his stillness, his expression. Men who died of sudden cardiac events didn't look like that. They slumped, they reached, they clawed at air or collapsed onto furniture. Daniel Voss had stayed seated, perfectly balanced, as if instructed. Mara stood and left her office without a word. The medical examiner's lab sat 3 floors below, bright, sterile, smelling faintly of antiseptic and metal. Dr. Helen Kravitz was already there, early 50s, sharp-eyed, not easily rattled. She looked up when Mara entered and immediately frowned. I didn't expect to see you, Kravitz said. That makes 2 of us, Mara replied. Kravitz gestured toward the report on her tablet. You've read it. Yes, Mara said. And I don't believe it. Kravitz sighed. Neither do I. That stopped Mara cold. They moved into the examination room. Daniel Voss lay beneath a white sheet exactly as before. Unmarked, unbruised, untouched by violence. Walk me through it, Mara said quietly. Kravitz pulled back the sheet just enough to expose Voss's chest and neck. No trauma, she said. No petechial hemorrhaging, no ligature marks, no injection sites. So why doesn't this feel right? Mara asked. Kravitz hesitated. Because of muscle response, she said, and posture. She pointed. When the heart stops suddenly, the body reacts. There's collapse, disruption, loss of tone. She tapped the table lightly. Voss retained posture far longer than expected. How much longer? Mara asked. Minutes. Too long. Mara's jaw tightened. What about toxins? Mara asked. Nothing standard, Kravitz said. No alcohol, no narcotics, no common poisons. But, Mara pressed, Kravitz continued, there was an anomaly. She pulled up a scan. Electrical patterns, cellular irregularities. Neural suppression, Kravitz said. Localized, temporary, almost surgical. Mara felt a chill. You're saying he was conscious, she said, but unable to react. Yes, Kravitz replied. Briefly. How brief? Seconds, maybe a minute. Long enough to understand, long enough to accept. Mara exhaled slowly. That's not natural. No, Kravitz agreed. It's precise. Mara lowered her voice. Could this be induced? Kravitz looked at the door, then back at Mara. There are methods, she said carefully. Experimental, rare, expensive. Mara straightened. Off the books? Entirely, Kravitz replied. Mara thought of the blackout, the missing minutes, the calm expression. Why does the report say natural causes? Kravitz didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was flat. Because someone reviewed it before it was finalized. Who? Mara asked. Kravitz shook her head. They didn't leave a name. They left instructions. Mara folded her arms. What kind? Language adjustments, certainty markers, narrow phrasing. Kravitz swallowed. And a reminder that my lab's funding cycle is under review. Mara looked back at Daniel Voss. He hadn't just been killed. His death had been rewritten. What happens if you amend the report? Mara asked. Kravitz met her gaze. I lose my position, and the report disappears anyway. Mara nodded. She understood. Truth wasn't being suppressed loudly. It was being smoothed down, softened, filed into something harmless. As Mara left the lab, her phone vibrated again. No message, just a calendar update. Case status review, mandatory attendance. Time, 2 p.m. Location, administrative conference room. She stared at the screen. They weren't just watching her anymore. They were preparing to shut her down. Because the autopsy hadn't failed. It had confirmed the worst possibility of all. Daniel Voss didn't die naturally. He was immobilized, silenced, and ended cleanly, quietly, and on schedule. The administrative conference room was already half full when Mara Ellison walked in. That was intentional. These meetings were never about discussion. They were about witnesses. 2 assistant commissioners, 1 internal affairs observer, a legal liaison she didn't recognize, and at the head of the table, Deputy Chief Roland Mercer. Mercer didn't look up when Mara took her seat. We're here to review the Voss matter, he began, specifically whether it warrants continued major crimes involvement. Mara said nothing. Mercer tapped a folder. Preliminary autopsy indicates natural causes, he continued. No forced entry, no suspects, no public risk. He finally looked at her. Which raises the question, he said evenly, of why you're still pushing. Myra met his gaze. Because the case file is incomplete, and because someone is deciding outcomes before facts. A murmur moved around the table. Mercer sighed. Detective, we've all reviewed your notes. The blackout, the witness confusion, your interpretations. Interpretations. That blackout wasn't random, Mara said, and Evan Cole didn't confuse his memory. It was interfered with. The legal liaison cleared his throat. There's no admissible evidence supporting that claim. Mara leaned forward. Because the evidence is older, she said. And buried. Mercer's eyes narrowed. Explain. Mara slid a thin file onto the table. "I pulled an archived death from 8 years ago," she said. "Same city, same profile, same outcome." She paused. Same silence. Mercer opened the file reluctantly. Name, Thomas Klein. Age, 62. Occupation, private equity consultant. Cause of death, natural, cardiac event. Location, secured residence. Investigation status, closed within 48 hours. Mara continued. No forced entry, no toxins detected. Witness statements altered post-incident. The room grew quiet. "Who worked the case?" Mercer asked. Mara didn't answer immediately. "You did," she said. Mercer stiffened. "That case was reviewed," he snapped. "Cleared. No irregularities." "Except one," Mara replied. She pointed to a timestamp. "There was a 7-minute power disruption," she said, "logged as a utility issue. 7 minutes. The same window." The internal affairs observer shifted uncomfortably. "That's a coincidence," Mercer said. "Then explain the second case," Mara replied. She placed another file down. 5 years ago, different district, same cause, same posture, same blackout." Mercer's face had gone pale. "Why weren't these connected?" one of the assistants asked quietly. Mara answered. "Because each time, the lead investigator was removed within 6 months. Retirement, transfer, health leave." She looked directly at Mercer. "You stayed, because you didn't push." The room was silent now. The legal liaison stood. "This meeting is over," he said sharply. "This case is officially reassigned." Mara didn't move. "To whom?" she asked. The liaison hesitated. "Federal oversight," he said, "effective immediately." Mara smiled faintly. That told her everything. Federal oversight wasn't escalation, it was erasure. As the room emptied, Mercer lingered. "You don't understand what you're touching," he said. "This isn't a person, it's a system." Mara gathered her files. "Systems leave patterns," she replied, "and patterns can be exposed." Mercer shook his head. "You think Voss was the center. He wasn't even the edge." Mara paused at the door. "Then why kill him?" Mercer didn't answer. Because the truth was finally clear. Daniel Voss hadn't been eliminated because he was powerful. He'd been eliminated because he was replaceable. And whatever system had perfected this method over 8 years was still operating, quietly, efficiently, and without consequence. Which meant the real investigation hadn't started yet. The warrant was approved at 11:48 p.m. Mara Ellison remembered the time because Judge Aaron Whitcomb had repeated it twice on the phone, as if anchoring himself to the moment. "This doesn't leave my chambers," he had said. "No digital copies, no early movement." Mara agreed. They were asking for access to sealed financial conduits tied indirectly to Daniel Voss. Not proof, not yet. Just a doorway. Whitcomb had hesitated before signing. Not because the request was weak, because he understood exactly who would notice. At 7:12 a.m. the next morning, the warrant no longer existed. Mara found out when she arrived at records and was told there was no such authorization on file. She didn't argue. She went straight to Whitcomb's courthouse. The hallway outside his chambers was dark. Lights off. Nameplate removed. A clerk stood nearby, packing files into a box. "Judge Whitcomb?" Mara asked. The clerk didn't look up. "Retired," she said. Mara blinked. "Effective when?" "Last night," the clerk replied. "Emergency medical leave converted to permanent retirement." Mara felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her. "That's not how retirements work," she said. The clerk finally looked at her. "They do when the paperwork arrives already signed." Mara stood outside the empty chambers for a long moment. Whitcomb had been on the bench for 27 years. He didn't panic. He didn't bend easily. which meant something had frightened him enough to vanish in less than 12 hours. Mara left the courthouse and dialed his number. It rang once, then went to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. On the third attempt, someone answered. Not Whitcomb. A man's voice. Calm. Professional. You shouldn't be calling this number, the man said. Where's Judge Whitcomb? Mara asked. He's safe, and he's finished. Finished with what? Mara asked. With this. With you. The line went dead. Mara stood still on the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear. That wasn't a threat. It was a boundary. She returned to her car and checked the warrant trail again. Not deleted. Replaced. A clean entry now showed, request withdrawn by applicant. That was a lie. Mara hadn't withdrawn anything. She drove to Whitcomb's house. Quiet neighborhood. Old trees. No police presence. The front door was unlocked. That worried her more than if it had been barricaded. Inside, everything was immaculate. Too immaculate. Personal photos removed. Bookshelves half empty. Desk cleared except for one item. A sticky note. 4 words. They know before you. Morris stared at it. Before warrants, before filings, before witnesses spoke, before law enforcement even moved. This wasn't surveillance. It was anticipation. She photographed the note and pocketed it. As she turned to leave, she noticed the calendar on the wall. One date circled in red. Tonight. No explanation, no note. Just urgency. Mara understood then. Whitcomb hadn't retired to protect himself. He'd retired to protect the process. By stepping out, he'd prevented something worse from being forced through his name. Mara returned to her car and sat quietly. Her phone buzzed once more. Internal message. Case assignment update. Detective Ellison removed from lead position. Effective immediately. She didn't react, because removal wasn't failure. It was confirmation. Judges didn't vanish. Warrants didn't rewrite themselves. And systems didn't move this fast unless they were already in motion. Daniel Voss wasn't the beginning. He was a scheduled item. And whatever force was executing these deaths didn't wait for permission. It pre-cleared resistance. Mara Ellison wasn't supposed to have access anymore. Her credentials had been downgraded, her case permissions frozen, her name quietly moved out of active rotations. But systems were built by people, and people left doors open without realizing it. At 2:14 a.m., using an old audit pathway no one had bothered to revoke, Mara logged into the financial compliance server. She wasn't looking for Daniel Voss anymore. She was looking for movement. Money never sat still. Even when it disappeared, it left turbulence behind. She pulled transaction records tied loosely to Voss's shell companies. Not ownership, influence, the kind that never showed up on paper. At first, nothing looked wrong. Accounts opened, accounts closed, payments made, fees charged. Clean. Too clean. Then she widened the time window. Not days, years. That's when she saw it. A pattern. Large sums would appear in intermediary accounts for exactly 6 to 9 minutes. Never longer, never shorter. Then they vanished. No destination, no withdrawal, no transfer. Just gone. Mara stared at the timestamps. 6 to 9 minutes. The same window as the blackouts. The same window as the deaths. Her pulse slowed. This wasn't laundering. Laundering hid money. This erased it. She cross-referenced the timestamps with the historical cases. Thomas Klein. Another death. Another blackout. Same minute. Same financial ripple. Mara whispered to herself. They're sinking it. She followed the trail backward. The accounts weren't owned by individuals. They were administered by a clearing entity, a financial ghost that existed only as a regulatory placeholder. No address, no office, no employees, just permissions and authority. Mara dug deeper. The entity had clearance levels reserved for emergency government operations, disaster response, covert contingency funds, money designed to move fast and ask no questions. But here, it wasn't saving lives, it was ending them. She leaned back and rubbed her eyes. Daniel Voss hadn't paid for his death directly. That would leave fingerprints. Instead, his value had been converted, quantified, approved, processed, like a request, a service. Her phone buzzed. A message from an old contact, Isaac Marino, financial crimes analyst. Quiet, careful, still trusted her. "You're poking something dangerous," the message read. "Whatever you're seeing, stop." Mara typed back. "Have you ever seen money exist for 7 minutes?" There was a long pause. Then Isaac replied, "Yes." Her fingers hovered. "When?" Mara typed. "Once," Isaac answered. "Years ago. I was told it was a classified anomaly." "Connected to deaths?" Mara asked. Another pause. "Yes." Mara felt the room tighten around her. "Who controls it?" Mara typed. Isaac didn't respond immediately. When he did, his message was shorter. "No one you can arrest." Mara stared at the screen. That confirmed her worst suspicion. This wasn't a criminal enterprise. It was a sanctioned mechanism, a way to remove people deemed inconvenient. No trials, no exposure, no public accountability, just authorization. She pulled one more thread. Recipient side data. Not names, not accounts, triggers. Each transaction spike coincided with a single internal code, CT17. She searched it. The result was redacted beyond visibility. Even the redaction was redacted. That was rare. That meant fear. Her screen flickered. Once. Twice. Then froze. A warning appeared. Unauthorized access detected. Session terminated. The server logged her out forcefully. She sat in silence. They knew. Not eventually. Now. Her phone rang. Isaac. She answered. "You need to leave," he said immediately. "Your access just tripped something big." "Tell me what CT17 is," Mara said. Isaac exhaled. "It's not a thing," he said. "It's a condition." Mara frowned. Meaning, when CT17 activates, someone has already decided a person won't exist much longer. Mara closed her eyes. Daniel Voss, Thomas Klein, the others. "All approved," Mara said. "Yes," Isaac replied. "And once approved, the system doesn't care who notices." The call cut off abruptly. Mara stared at the dark phone screen. Money that appeared only long enough to erase people, a condition that activated death, a system that anticipated resistance. This wasn't corruption. Corruption could be exposed. This was infrastructure, and infrastructure didn't panic. It adjusted, which meant the next phase wasn't going to be subtle. They weren't just going to block her anymore. They were going to neutralize her. The alert came through at 4:26 a.m. No sirens, no urgency flags, no press interest. Just another natural death notification routed quietly through the system. Male, late 50s, private residence, no signs of forced entry. Mara Ellison read the name twice. Arthur Bell. She didn't recognize it at first. That bothered her. Then she checked the timestamp. Time of death, between 3:11 a.m. and 3:20 a.m. 9 minutes. Mara's stomach tightened. Arthur Bell wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. He wasn't powerful, which meant this death wasn't cleanup. It was proof. She drove to the address anyway. A modest townhouse on the edge of the city. No patrol cars outside. No tape. Just one exhausted EMT sitting on the steps, finishing a report. "Natural causes?" Mara asked, flashing her badge. The EMT nodded. "Heart failure," he said. "Guy was already on medication." Mara stepped inside. The living room was dim. Television still on, volume muted. Arthur Bell lay on the couch, head tilted slightly to the side. One hand rested on his chest, the other hung limply at his side. He looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Mara crouched. No signs of struggle. No overturned furniture. No spilled drinks. The same stillness. She glanced at the wall clock. Stopped. 3:14 a.m. Mara straightened slowly. "Did you notice the clock?" she asked. The EMT frowned. "No," he said. "Why?" "It stopped during the window," Mara replied. The EMT shrugged. "Battery, maybe." Mara didn't argue. She moved toward the kitchen. On the counter sat an envelope. Unopened. No return address. Just a name written neatly across the front. Arthur Bell. Mara slipped on gloves and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. No letterhead. 4 lines. You were never the target. You were the confirmation. This system still works. Stop. Mara folded the paper carefully. Arthur Bell hadn't been important. That was the point. This death wasn't about removal. It was about message delivery. She checked her phone. No alerts, no messages. Just silence. Then, slowly, one new notification appeared. Financial compliance update. Archived. She didn't open it. She already knew. Arthur Bell's name would be gone within hours, filed as another quiet statistic. No investigation, no questions. She looked back at the body. "They're testing me," she whispered. This wasn't escalation, it was calibration. The system had adjusted to her presence and demonstrated what it could do without drawing attention. And if Arthur Bell could be erased this easily, so could anyone else, including her. Mara Ellison didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table as dawn crept through the blinds, Arthur Bell's letter folded neatly beside her coffee. You were never the target. You were the confirmation. That line wouldn't let go. At 7:18 a.m., her phone rang. Private number. She answered without speaking. You should have listened, a woman's voice said. Not threatening, not angry. Tired. Who is this? Mara asked. There was a pause. Someone who tried to stop it once. Mara leaned back. You're calling to scare me? She asked. No, the woman replied. I'm calling to warn you. Mara glanced at the letter. You're late, she said. I know, the voice replied softly. The woman exhaled. My name doesn't matter, she continued, but I worked on the oversight committee when CT-17 was created. Mara felt a jolt. Created? She asked. Yes, the woman said. It wasn't always a condition. It was a protocol. Mara's grip tightened on the phone. What does it do? She asked. It authorizes removal, the woman said, without process, without record. Mara closed her eyes. How is someone selected? The woman hesitated. That changed, she admitted. At first, it required consensus, evidence, risk modeling. And now, Mara asked. Now it requires momentum, the woman said. Enough quiet approvals, enough silence. Mara stood. Daniel Voss, she said. Arthur Bell. They weren't equal, the woman replied, but they triggered the same response. Why Bell? Mara asked. The woman's voice cracked slightly. Because he noticed something, she said, and because someone noticed that you noticed. Mara felt the room go cold. This call, she said, is being monitored. Yes, the woman replied. They'll know I reached out. Then why do it? Mara asked. Another pause. Because the system only survives if people believe it's invisible, the woman said. And you've made it visible. Mara swallowed. What happens now? She asked. They'll move to containment, the woman said. Not arrests, not deaths. Then what? Mara pressed. Isolation, the woman replied. Discredit. Remove your access. Rewrite your history. Mara laughed once, humorless. They're already doing that. Yes, the woman said, but they'll finish it. The call ended abruptly. Mara stared at her phone. Seconds later, another alert came in. Internal Affairs Notice. Subject, Review of Conduct. Status, Immediate. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Containment had begun. Arthur Bell wasn't the warning. This call was. And it had come too late. The Internal Affairs Office didn't look hostile. That was the first thing Mara Ellison noticed. No raised voices, no tension in the air, no urgency, just calm efficiency, which was worse. She was escorted into a small conference room with glass walls and neutral lighting. 2 chairs, 1 table, a recorder already running. 3 people waited inside. An internal affairs captain she vaguely recognized, a civilian oversight attorney, and a man she had never seen before. The man smiled politely. That told Mara everything. Detective Ellison, the captain began, this is an administrative review regarding your recent conduct. Mara sat without speaking. You've accessed restricted systems, the attorney continued, contacted protected witnesses, and pursued investigative angles outside your authorization. Mara folded her hands. Outside whose authorization? She asked. The man she didn't recognize leaned forward. Outside the scope of public safety, he said calmly. His voice was smooth, practiced. And who are you? Mara asked. Someone ensuring balance, he replied. My name won't appear in this record. Mara nodded. Of course it wouldn't. The captain slid a tablet across the table. On it were summaries, edited versions of her actions. No blackout, no missing minutes, no financial anomalies, no CT-17. Just a narrative. A detective showing signs of obsession, overreach, professional instability following a high-profile death. You're being relieved of duty pending evaluation, the captain said, effective immediately. Mara looked up. For how long? She asked. The man smiled again. Until this resolves itself. Mara stood. So that's it? She asked. No hearing, no defense? The attorney shrugged. This isn't punitive, she said. It's preventative. Mara laughed quietly. You're not stopping me because I'm wrong, she said. You're stopping me because I'm early. The man didn't deny it. Security entered the room. Mara handed over her badge, her weapon, her access card. Each item placed carefully into evidence bags, finality disguised as procedure. As she was escorted out, the man spoke one last time. You did excellent work, he said, just on the wrong side of relevance. Outside, the city felt louder, messier, real. Mara stood on the courthouse steps, no longer a detective, just a woman with too much knowledge. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unsaved contact. They always remove the messenger before the message spreads. Stay alive. Mara looked up at the sky. She wasn't afraid, because now she understood the final mistake the system had made. They had removed her authority, but they hadn't removed her memory, and memory was the one thing they couldn't audit, redact, or erase. Not yet. Losing her badge didn't slow Mara Ellison down. It clarified her. She stopped chasing authority and started following behavior. The system had one weakness. It still needed people to believe in faces. So Mara looked for the face they wanted exposed. It didn't take long. 3 days after her removal, a name began circulating quietly through legal back channels and financial press whispers. Sebastian Rowe. Venture philanthropist. Defense-adjacent investor. Public reform advocate. The kind of man who gave speeches about accountability while funding structures that never appeared on budgets. Rowe's name began appearing near Daniel Voss's final months. Board overlap. Shared intermediaries. Mutual legal counsel. Too neat. Mara watched from a distance as Roe's reputation unraveled at precisely the right pace. Anonymous tips, leaked documents, editorial pressure. The media smelled blood. Roe responded exactly as expected. A press conference, a controlled apology, promises of transparency. I had no knowledge of wrongdoing, he said calmly. I welcome any investigation. Mara watched the broadcast from a cafe television. The crowd wanted him to be guilty. That was the trap. She dug deeper. Roe's finances were clean, almost aggressively so. No 6-minute anomalies, no CT17 triggers, no blackout correlations. Roe wasn't buying deaths. He was absorbing blame. Mara followed one last thread. The leak source. It traced back to a private consultancy that specialized in narrative containment, not removal, redirection. Roe wasn't the buyer, he was the buffer, a public figure designed to satisfy outrage and close the story. That meant the real operator stayed invisible. And then Mara saw it. Roe's calendar. One meeting stood out. Recurring, private, no location. Title, Continuity Review. Same phrase used in CT17 documentation. Mara's pulse quickened. She searched harder. The attendees weren't executives. They were placeholders, shell identities, people who existed only long enough to vote. The face wasn't Roe. The face was the process, and Roe knew it. That night, Mara received another message. Unknown number. You figured it out, it read. He's supposed to fall. Mara typed back. And when he does, there was a delay. Nothing changes. Mara stared at the screen. That was the truth. The system didn't care who took the blame, as long as the structure survived. Roe would burn publicly, the machine would continue privately. Mara deleted the thread, because now she understood the scale. This wasn't a conspiracy, it was governance without accountability. And she was done chasing men. She needed proof that couldn't be redirected. Mara Ellison stopped thinking like a detective. Detectives chased suspects, they followed jurisdictions, they waited for warrants. This wasn't a crime, it was a system. And systems didn't live in cities, they lived across them. Mara rented a cheap room under a false name and built her workspace the old way. No cloud, no synced devices, just paper, offline storage, and time. She pins locations on a map. Daniel Voss, New York. Thomas Klein, Chicago. Arthur Bell, Newark. Different cities, different years, different victims. Same silence. She overlaid timelines. Every case shared 4 constants. 1, a private secured location. 2, a narrow blackout window. 6 to 9 minutes. 3, financial anomalies timed to the blackout. 4, death ruled as natural within 48 hours. She added more cases. Deaths that never made headlines. Retirements that happened overnight. Investigations that closed themselves. By the end of the second night, the map was full. Cities lit up like a constellation. New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Denver, Seattle, Phoenix. CT17 wasn't regional, it was national. Mara cross-referenced something else. Election cycles, budget approvals, emergency authorizations. The pattern sharpened. Every activation followed moments of political transition, power shifts, oversight gaps, windows. Not time windows, authority windows. CT17 didn't act randomly. It acted when no one was watching closely enough. Mara leans back, exhaustion creeping in. This explains everything. Why judges vanished, why lawyers filed nothing, why investigators were removed quietly. The system wasn't hiding, it was timing itself. Her burner phone buzzed. One-word message. Stop. She ignored it. She found something else. One city hadn't just one case, it had 3. All erased, all sealed, all connected to a single hospital. That caught her attention. Hospitals kept records, biological records, electrical data, monitoring logs. Even the cleanest death left traces there. She circled the city. Baltimore. If CT-17 had a flaw, it would be medical, not financial, not legal. Bodies couldn't lie forever. Mara folded the map carefully. For the first time since Daniel Voss, she felt something dangerous. Hope. Because national systems required one thing above all else: consistency. And consistency always broke somewhere. Jonah Reed didn't reach out to Mara Ellison by accident. He had tried official channels first: emails that bounced, phone calls that routed nowhere, requests that disappeared before anyone could deny them. So he did what people did when systems refused to listen. He went around them. Mara was in Baltimore for less than 12 hours when the note appeared under her motel door. No name, no number, just an address and a time. 9:30 p.m., Pier 17. She considered ignoring it. Then she noticed the symbol drawn faintly in pencil at the bottom of the paper. A small triangle. Inside it, a vertical line. The same mark she had seen once before, scrawled in the margin of an old, sealed file from Chicago. She went. Pier 17 was quiet. Closed warehouses. Salt in the air. No witnesses. A man leaned against the railing, hands in his pockets, watching the water. He didn't turn when she approached. "You shouldn't be here," he said calmly. "They're watching Baltimore closely right now." Mara stopped a few feet away. "So are you," she replied. The man smiled slightly and finally turned. Mid-40s, unremarkable face, tired eyes. "Jonah Reed," he said. "Former homicide, Chicago." Mara's pulse steadied. "You worked the Klein case," she said. Jonah nodded. "And two others that never officially existed," he replied. "All natural deaths, all wrong." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the water slap against the pier. "I didn't believe it at first," Jonah continued. "I thought I was losing perspective, seeing patterns where there were none." Mara glanced at him. "What changed?" she asked. Jonah reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded photograph. He handed it to her. It showed a man seated at a kitchen table, upright, eyes open, hands relaxed. The same posture. He died during a 6-minute power interruption. Hospital monitors went offline at the same time. Mara exhaled slowly. "You noticed the blackout," she said. "You noticed the stillness," Jonah replied. "And I noticed my report was rewritten before I submitted it." Mara nodded. "They removed you," she said. Jonah laughed quietly. "Retired me," he corrected, "with a pension and a non-disclosure agreement I never signed." They walked along the pier. "I followed the money," Jonah continued. "Found nothing. Followed the law. Found less." "So you followed behavior," Mara said. Jonah looked at her sharply. "Yes," he said, "and behavior doesn't change unless it's pressured." He stopped walking. "I found a hospital," he said. "The same one you circled. Baltimore. They're using medical infrastructure. Short-range neural suppression, temporary, leaves almost nothing behind." Mara felt the last pieces click into place. That's why the autopsies don't match, and why the deaths look natural. Jonah nodded. "They're turning hospitals into delivery systems. Clean, quiet, plausibly deniable." Mara met his eyes. "You kept evidence," she said. Jonah hesitated. "Off the books," he admitted. "Analog, handwritten, biological readouts they missed." Mara didn't smile. She didn't need to. For the first time, she wasn't alone in the pattern. "They're not removing threats," Mara said quietly. "They're removing friction." Jonah nodded. "And they don't expect anyone to connect cities, because no one ever does." Mara folded the photograph and slipped it into her pocket. "Then we changed that," she said. Jonah looked back toward the dark water. They'll come faster now, he warned. Two of us is harder to isolate. Mara stared out at the city lights. Good, she said. Let them. Because CT-17 had been designed to erase individuals. It had never been tested against collaboration. They found her by accident. That was the part that still bothered Mara days later. Not because accidents were rare, but because CT-17 wasn't supposed to allow them. Jonah Reed was the one who noticed the anomaly. A single hospital entry buried inside a maintenance report, filed as a device desynchronization event, time-stamped during a 7-minute window. Same window, different outcome. Someone didn't die, Jonah said quietly. Mara leaned over the table as he spread out photocopied charts and handwritten notes. Patient name, Elena Morales, age 34, admitted for routine cardiac monitoring. Status, discharged, stable. Discharged. Mara felt her chest tighten. They don't miss, she said. Jonah nodded. They don't, he agreed, which means something interrupted the process. They drove to the rehab center where Elena was recovering, not under guard, not hidden, because no one was supposed to look. Elena Morales sat by the window when they entered, thin, pale, alive. She looked up as they approached, eyes sharp despite the fatigue. You're not doctors, she said immediately. No, Mara replied gently. We're here because you survived. That landed. Elena's hands tightened around the blanket. They told me it was a panic attack, she said, that my heart paused briefly, that it happens. Jonah pulled up a chair. Did you feel anything? He asked. Elena hesitated. Pressure, she said. Like someone had turned my body off, but my mind stayed on. Mara felt a chill. Could you move? She asked. Elena shook her head. No, she whispered. I could hear machines flatline. I could hear people leave the room. She swallowed. I thought I was dead. Jonah exchanged a glance with Mara. How long? Mara asked. I don't know, Elena replied. Time felt stretched. Mara leaned forward. Did anything interrupt it? She asked. Elena nodded slowly. Yes. She pointed toward the window. There was an alarm, not medical, electrical, a power surge. Maintenance logs confirmed it later. A faulty backup relay triggered early. The system had been reactivated too soon. CT-17 had been cut short. Jonah exhaled. That's the flaw, he said. They rely on precision. Elena looked between them. You're saying this was done to me, she said. On purpose? Mara didn't lie. Yes, she said. And you weren't supposed to wake up. Silence filled the room. Elena stared at her hands. Why me? She asked. Mara answered carefully. Because you saw something, she said, or knew something, or were about to. Elena's eyes widened slightly. There was a report, she said suddenly. A billing irregularity. I flagged it during my shift. Jonah stiffened. Shift? He asked. Elena said, I work in hospital finance, emergency accounts, off-cycle funding. Jonah closed her eyes briefly. CT-17. They tried to remove friction, Mara said softly, and instead they left behind a witness. Elena looked up. They'll come back, she said. Yes, Jonah replied. They will. Mara met Elena's gaze. But this time, she said, we'll be ready. Because CT-17 had finally done the one thing it was never designed to do. It left someone alive who remembered everything. Elena Morales was still breathing. That alone changed everything. CT-17 wasn't designed to handle survivors. It removed problems. It didn't manage aftermaths, which meant the system had only one option left: control the story. Mara felt it happen before she could prove it. The first sign came from a journalist, Lena Park. Investigative, careful, one of the few reporters who still checked primary sources. She called Mara's burner phone just after noon. "I'm getting blocked," Lena said without preamble. "Not legally, logistically." "Blocked how?" Mara asked. "Editors pulling assignments, sources going quiet. My access badge to city records stopped working this morning." Mara closed her eyes. "They're preempting you," she said. Lena laughed once. "That's the thing," she replied. "I haven't even published anything yet." That was the point. They didn't wait for stories anymore. They strangled them in draft form. Within hours, the narrative shifted. A brief appeared on local feeds. "Unconfirmed reports of system glitch at Baltimore Medical Center. Officials deny patient risk." No names, no interviews, no follow-up. By evening, a second article replaced it. "Patient error causes temporary monitoring issue. Hospital cleared of wrongdoing." Elena Morales' name was never mentioned. She had been edited out while still alive. Jonah watched the coverage in silence. "They're not denying it," he said finally. "They're exhausting it." Mara nodded. "That's how you bury truth now," she replied. "Not with lies, with boredom." The next move was quieter. Elena's discharge paperwork was amended, her episode reclassified. Diagnostic codes shifted just enough to invalidate testimony. If she spoke now, she'd sound confused, unreliable, medically compromised. A survivor rewritten into a question mark. Elena noticed. "They're changing my records," she said, voice shaking. "I checked the patient portal. Things I remember aren't there anymore." Mara took her hand. "They can edit files," she said. "They can't edit memory." But memory alone wasn't enough. They needed something permanent, something external, something that couldn't be quietly redirected. Jonah looked up from his notes. "There's a problem," he said. "If this goes public the normal way, they'll crush it." Mara nodded. "That means we don't go public," she said. "We go irreversible." They sat in silence. Then Elena spoke. "There's an audit mirror in the hospital's emergency finance system." Jonah turned sharply. "A mirror?" he asked. "For redundancy," Elena explained. "Offline snapshotting, stored outside normal compliance channels." Mara felt a spark. "Where?" she asked. Elena hesitated. "Federal Archive Relay," she said, "designed for disaster reconstruction." Jonah leaned back slowly. "That's not media. That's record." Mara smiled for the first time in days. Media could be buried. Whistleblowers could be discredited. But archived systems, once seeded, couldn't be silently erased without exposure. "They're rewriting the present," Mara said, "so we anchor the past." Outside, the city moved on. Traffic, noise, normal life. And somewhere inside secure servers, CT-17 adjusted its thresholds, because now it wasn't dealing with rumors, it was dealing with evidence that refused to disappear. They didn't steal the files. That was the first surprise. The audit mirror Elena described still existed, untouched, unflagged, quietly sinking in the background like it had been designed to do from the beginning. Which meant the system hadn't anticipated anyone looking there. Jonah accessed the relay using credentials Elena remembered but never realized mattered. Old, dormant, designed for disasters that never happened. The data loaded slowly. Thousands of entries, redundant logs, power states, medical telemetry. And then Mara saw it. A recurring signal embedded inside the blackout windows. Not a device, not a toxin, not a command. A pattern. "Zoom in," Mara said. Jonah did. The signal wasn't broadcast widely. It wasn't loud. It wasn't forceful. It was targeted. Localized electromagnetic pulses, short range, ultra specific, calibrated to interfere with neural motor pathways. Neural suppression, Jonah said quietly. Temporary, precise. Elena swallowed. You're saying they shut people down, she said, while keeping them conscious. Yes, Mara replied, and while keeping the body intact. No wounds, no bruises, no poisons, just silence inside the nervous system. The weapon wasn't designed to kill. That was the horrifying part. It was designed to pause, to immobilize, to make the body wait, while the heart followed instructions it never received. Jonah scrolled further. A classification header appeared. Project CT-17. Status: deployed. Ethical classification: non-lethal intervention when properly terminated. Mara felt her stomach turn. They called this non-lethal, she said. Because it usually was, replied Jonah, until someone decided when to stop the signal. Elena stared at the screen. So someone watches, she said, and decides whether you wake up. Mara nodded. That's the real weapon, she said, not the signal. She leaned closer. Authorization. The logs showed it clearly now. Every CT-17 activation had two phases. Initiation, automated. Termination, manual. Someone had to end it. And in every death case, termination never came. The system didn't fail. Someone chose not to stop it. Jonah pulled up the operator layer. Access wasn't tied to a name. It was tied to a role. Continuity Oversight Authority. A role that rotated. A role that never stayed long enough to leave fingerprints. A role protected by emergency doctrine. This is why they never panic. No one person owns the decision, and everyone shares the guilt. Mara replied. Elena leans back, shaking. They told me it was humane, she whispered. I remember that word. Someone said it. Mara closed the laptop gently. That word had protected the system for years. Humane, clean, necessary. CT-17 wasn't a weapon built for war. It was built for governance, for moments when exposure was considered more dangerous than death, for people deemed too disruptive to manage publicly. They don't assassinate, they resolve. Jonah looked at her. And now? He asked. Mara met his gaze. Now we prove intent, she said, because tools don't kill people. She stood. Decisions do. And somewhere inside a quiet oversight channel, someone realized CT-17 had finally been understood, not as an accident, not as a safeguard, but as a choice. They didn't find his name in the data. They found his shadow. Jonah was the one who noticed it first, a subtle irregularity in the termination logs. Every CT-17 activation ended in one of two ways, a manual termination or silence. But when termination did happen, it always came from the same origin point. Not a user, not a terminal, not even a department. A clearance corridor. Jonah highlighted the note on the screen. This doesn't belong to an agency, he said. It belongs to a position. Mara leans closer. The corridor had no fixed address, no office, no budget line. It existed only during transitions, elections, emergencies, oversight gaps. A temporary authority with permanent consequences. Continuity Oversight Authority, Mara read aloud. Same title, higher layer. Elena felt sick. So someone steps into this role, she said, decides who lives, and then disappears. Yes, Joan replied, and no one ever sees the same person twice. Mara didn't believe that. Power always left fingerprints. You just had to know where to look. She followed the corridor backward. Not through systems, but through history. Every time CT-17 terminated cleanly, there was a parallel event. A sudden policy reversal, a sealed executive memo, an emergency authorization signed at odd hours, and one constant: the same signature style. Not a name, a habit. 3 initials, always handwritten, always angled slightly upward. RCM. Mara felt a slow chill. She'd seen it before. Not on death records, on something older. Judicial briefings, national security affidavits, closed-door testimonies. One man. Never elected, never appointed publicly, never removed. Roland C. Mercer, Deputy Chief Mercer, her former supervisor. The room went silent. Jonah broke it. "That's impossible," he said. "He's local command." "No," Mara replied quietly. "He's liaison." Everything snapped into place. Mercer wasn't powerful because of his rank. He was powerful because he existed between systems: law enforcement, judiciary, federal oversight. He never issued orders. He coordinated. Never decided. He advised. And when CT-17 needed a human endpoint, someone had to be trusted enough to act without asking questions. Mercer had been there for every transition, every oversight gap, every erased case. Elena whispered, "He told me it was humane." Mara closed her eyes. Mercer had been the calm voice, the reassuring presence, the man who convinced others it was necessary. He didn't pull triggers, he signed off on silence. Jonah leaned back. "So what now?" he asked. "You can't arrest a role." Mara opened her eyes. "No," she said, "but you can expose the moment it's used." She pointed to the data. "Termination requires one thing: real-time authorization." Jonah nodded slowly. "A live decision." Mara's voice hardened. "And live decisions leave live trails." They didn't need to prove every death. They only needed to catch one choice. Somewhere, Mercer was still operating, still stepping into the corridor when the moment demanded it. And sooner or later, CT-17 would activate again. This time, they wouldn't stop it. They'd watch it. And when the termination order came, the man above the law would finally be seen making it. They didn't stop the next activation. That was the hardest part. Mara Ellison had spent her entire career preventing harm, interrupting violence, pulling people back from the edge. Now she was doing the opposite: waiting. Jonah set the parameters carefully, not to trigger CT-17. That would leave a trail too obvious. Instead, they built something subtler: a profile. A composite of behaviors CT-17 had always responded to: access to sensitive financial irregularities, pending disclosure potential, low public visibility, high institutional inconvenience. A friction point. They seeded the system with it quietly, using outdated audit hooks Elena still remembered. No names, no faces, just risk. Then they waited. It took 36 hours. At 2:41 a.m., the system twitched. Jonah's screen pulsed once. CT-17, pre-authorization state. Mara felt her breath slow. "It's happening," Jonah said. They did nothing. At 2:44 a.m., the signal localized. Hospital network, Baltimore. Same infrastructure, same reach. At 2:47 a.m., the initiation phase logged. Neural suppression, armed. Duration, variable. Termination, pending. Mara clenched her fists. "There's a person on the other end," Elena whispered. "A real person." "Yes," Mara said, "and we stop it before the end." That was the line they wouldn't cross. At 2:48 a.m., the corridor opened. Continuity Oversight Authority active. Jonah's hands hovered over the keyboard. The authorization window is live, he said. Someone has to decide. They waited. Seconds stretched. At 2:49 a.m., a new signal appeared. Manual access request corridor node. Not a name, not an ID, just the signature pattern. RCM. Mara's chest tightened. There he is, she said. The authorization didn't execute immediately. That was new. It paused, as if someone on the other end was hesitating. Mercer had always been careful. He preferred inevitability. This time, something felt off. At 2:50 a.m., a message appeared in the system log. Request justification required. Jonah's eyes widened. They added a check, he said. Someone's watching the watchers now. Mara exhaled slowly. The system was evolving, protecting itself. At 2:51 a.m., the justification field populated. Single sentence, unmistakable. Risk of uncontrolled disclosure exceeds acceptable threshold. Mara felt anger rise. A life reduced to a threshold. Jonah highlighted the entry. That's intent, he said. Clean, documented. At 2:52 a.m., the termination clock started ticking. If Mercer approved silence, the signal would continue. If he terminated, the subject would live. They watched the countdown. 5 seconds. 4. 3. Mara whispered. Choose. The clock hit 0. Termination signal sent. The neural suppression shut down. The subject lived. The room fell silent. Elena sagged in her chair. He stopped it, she said. No, Mara replied. He hesitated. And that hesitation mattered more than a death, because CT-17 had never logged a doubt before. Mercer had felt pressure, oversight, exposure. For the first time, the man above the law had flinched. Jonah saved everything: the access request, the justification, the signature. This is it, he said. This is the moment. Mara nodded. They hadn't caught him killing someone. They'd caught him choosing not to, which proved something far more dangerous: that CT-17 was real, that it required human judgment, and that judgment could be seen. The trap had worked. Now came the part no system could survive: being shown. They didn't go to the media. Not first. Media could be drowned, redirected, exhausted. What Mara Ellison and Jonah Reed released wasn't a story. It was a record. At 6:03 a.m., identical data packets appeared in 3 places simultaneously: the Federal Disaster Archive Relay, a sealed Congressional Oversight Dropbox, and International Human Rights Repository with mirrored servers. No press release, no commentary, no names attached, just documentation. Raw, time-stamped, uninterpreted. CT-17 initiation logs, termination authorization trails, the justification text, and the signature pattern, RCM. They didn't accuse. They let the system speak for itself. For 6 hours, nothing happened. That silence was expected. Bureaucracies don't react instantly. They assess. They calculate exposure. They look for ways to contain damage. At 12:41 p.m., the first crack appeared. A routine congressional session was abruptly recessed. No explanation. Cameras cut. At 1:09 p.m., a federal oversight committee issued a single-line statement. Certain continuity mechanisms are under review. No denial. At 1:22 p.m., Mercer's name vanished from internal directories. Not removed, not retired, reassigned to external consultation. A holding pattern. Mara watched the updates roll in from a borrowed laptop in a quiet library. They're buying time, Jonah said, trying to decide if they can survive this. They can't, Mara replied, because the rule they broke wasn't legal. Jonah frowned. What was it? Mara didn't look away from the screen. Invisibility, she said. By mid-afternoon, the leak started, not from journalists, from institutions. A hospital in Seattle quietly suspended a non-lethal neural compliance trial. A finance department in Phoenix froze emergency clearing accounts. A judge in Atlanta unsealed a case that had been closed for 7 years. People weren't exposing CP17, they were distancing themselves from it. The system was radioactive now. At 4:17 p.m., a news outlet finally caught up. The headline was cautious, vague, questions raised over emergency continuity protocols. But the subheading mattered more. Certain sources confirm human authorization in disputed medical interventions. That was it. Human authorization. The illusion shattered. Mercer didn't issue a statement. He didn't deny involvement. He didn't apologize. Because men like him didn't survive by speaking. They survived by waiting for silence to return. But this time, silence didn't come. Elena Morales watched the broadcast from a rehab center common room. Other patients stared at the screen, confused, uneasy. They're saying it without saying it, Shalena whispered. Mara nodded. That's how systems confess, by changing behavior. CT17 didn't shut down that day. It didn't need to. Every activation afterward would be questioned, logged, watched. The corridor was no longer invisible, and a system built on quiet decisions couldn't function once it was loud. Jonah closed the laptop. What happens to Mercer? He asked. Mara exhaled slowly. He won't be arrested. He won't be celebrated. Jonah looked at her. He'll be erased, she continued, just like the people he erased. Outside, sirens wailed, normal city sounds, life continuing. But underneath it, something irreversible had happened. For the first time in years, a decision that should never have existed had been forced into the light, and the system had flinched. The official announcement came 3 weeks later. Buried, worded carefully, released on a Friday evening. A classified continuity protocol has been formally discontinued following internal review. No apology, no names, no acknowledgement of harm, just an ending. For most people, that was enough. The story faded. Attention moved on. That's how systems healed themselves, by waiting for memory to tire. But consequences don't need headlines. They just need time. The corridor never opened again. CT17 remained in the archives, locked behind layers of review and legal hesitation. Every emergency authorization now required witnesses. Every termination demanded signatures from people who didn't want to sign. The system didn't die. It aged, and aging systems lost precision. Roland C. Mercer retired quietly. No ceremony, no investigation, no public disgrace. He moved out of the city, out of records, out of relevance. Men like him never paid in court. They paid in isolation. Mara Ellison never returned to the badge. She was offered reinstatement, unofficially, carefully, a chance to come back quietly. She declined. Some lines once crossed couldn't be uncrossed. Jonah Reed testified once, behind closed doors, no cameras, no transcripts. After that, he disappeared into consultancy work no one advertised. He understood now. The goal wasn't to dismantle every dark system. It was to make them afraid to function. Elena Morales went back to work 6 months later. Different hospital, different department. She carried the memory carefully, not as trauma, as warning. Sometimes she would pause during routine audits, looking at numbers that didn't quite add up, and she would ask questions. That was enough. On the anniversary of Daniel Voss's death, Mara returned to the city quietly. She stood across the street from the penthouse. The lights were on. Someone new lived there now, life continuing, unaware. That was the final truth. Justice didn't arrive as punishment. It arrived as interruption. CT-17 had been built to erase friction, to make problems vanish without noise. What Mara and the others had done wasn't to destroy it. They made it visible, and visibility was fatal to systems like that. As Mara walked away, her phone buzzed once. No number, no name, just a message. "Do you think it's really over?" She typed back. "No," she wrote, "but now they know we're watching." She slipped the phone into her pocket and kept walking. The city swallowed her. And somewhere inside systems designed to act without conscience, a new variable had been introduced: witnesses.